All right, folks, we're moving on to example 2 here in 6.7. Still talking about sequences, and hopefully we've caught on to something that's been brought to our attention before. And we're going to be talking about it in B here, but I want to go ahead and bring it up. Anytime you're switching from a positive to a negative in consecutive terms, that means you're going to be having to use multiplication of a negative number. So you're constantly, each term is going to be multiplied by a negative number because the first time you do it, it's going to switch it to positive or to negative, but then it switches back and forth. It's going to alternate because a negative times a positive is a negative. So if you get a negative answer and multiply it by a negative, you're going to get a positive. So now you have a positive times a negative, you're going to get a negative. And now you have a negative times a negative, you're going to get a positive. Hopefully you see and hear that pattern. And it's going to be option B, one to give you a heads up about that. So that way we can move straight forward. Now, with that said, let's talk about A. We're looking at what kind of pattern there is to go from one term to the next consecutive term. In other words, I don't want to sit there and say, well, let me jump from, held it too long, there we go. I don't want to jump from 3 to 24. I want to jump from 3 to 6. So from 3 to 6, I'm just going to multiply by 2. Then I look at 6 to 12, and all I did was multiply by 2. And 12 to 24 is multiply by 2. So there should be a pattern seen here, and that is I'm going to multiply whatever term I'm currently on by 2 to get my next consecutive term, which means 24 times 2 is 48. There's 1, but it wants 3 consecutive terms. So I'm going to take 48 times 2. And I'm going to get 96. There's my second next consecutive term. So I'm going to take 96 times 2. Let's see, that's 192. And that's my third consecutive term. I could keep going. I could just multiply this by 2, but it only wants 3, so that's all I'm going to give it. So on A, my next 3 consecutive terms are 48. So actually the best way to do is dot, dot, dot to show that this wasn't the beginning of the list. This is just the next. 48, 96, and 192. On B, it's a little bit more fun because what we've got to notice is, again, this is positive because there's nothing there, and this is negative. So I know no matter what, to go from 64 to 16, it's going to include a negative. But what's actually, and I want to think in times of multiplying, so this is the same thing as multiplying by a negative 1/4, because if I take 64 and divide it by 4, I'll get 16. So if I take 64 and divide it by negative 4, I'm going to get a negative 16. And the way to represent division through multiplication is to invert. So I'm going to take my 4 that I've been multiplying and actually turn it into, so I've been dividing, sorry, and I'm actually going to multiply by 1/4 or 4 flipped. And I can check that here. I know to go from 16 to 4 is the same thing as dividing by 4 or multiplying by 1/4. And I got to go from a negative to a positive. The only way to do that is to be negative. So it is the same term each time. So all I'm really doing is multiplying by a negative 1/4 each time, or it means I'm dividing by 4, however I want to look at it. So what that means is the next term that I'm going to get, and I'm going to need 3, so I'm going to get positive 1/4. Because 1 times anything is itself, and a negative times a negative is a positive. Well, the next term, my second term here that I'm trying to find, would be divide this by 4, which means I get negative 1/16. Did you notice that this 4 and this 4 certainly are alike? How about the next term before it was 16 and now the term after the 4 is 16? So what do you think the third term is going to be. I sure hope you guessed that negative 1/16 times my same negative 1/4 is going to be a positive 1/64, because you would be correct. And those are my 3 next consecutive terms. Now, I'm just going to write it because the official answer would be my next 3 consecutive terms are, then I'd list them. So I'm just going to write them like this, where I ended the last one in blue. I'm just going to write them here. It would be positive 1/4. It would be negative 1/16. And it would be positive 1/64. And I didn't have to remember 6 times 4. I just realized the pattern of multiplying by the 4th.